Hello, and thanks for joining us for another Five Things podcast. I've got a longtime friend of mine, and I'll kind of get into how we got started, but Bill Bourbonnais joining us. He's a certified tax specialist, among other titles. You want to share some of those, Bill?
Sure. Got hooked on taxes back in 1993. Just fell in love with it. It was a part-time job to pay off my student loans, and found out it was really cool being able to save people taxes, put some money back in their pockets. So some of my titles or licenses, if you want, an enrolled agent, and enrolled agent is a license granted by the U.S. Treasury. Enrolled agents can represent taxpayers at all levels of the IRS. Requires continuing education, qualifying education. Actually came into being back in the 1800s after the Civil War. The government wanted people that were qualified to represent taxpayers in cases against the government for reparations for horses that were conscripted and that kind of thing into the Civil War. So it's been around a long time. Specialized in tax, so enrolled agents are pretty detailed into tax.
Mm-hmm.
The other qualifications I have: certified tax strategist and certified tax coach. Those are as part of my membership in the American Institute of Certified Tax Planners. And what we have to do to attain those certifications is we have to prepare and present and provide tax strategies, tax reduction strategies, to a certain number of clients that save a certain amount of money in each strategy. So I've hit those targets. Each one, certified tax coach, certified tax planner, certified tax strategist, have different levels of those tax savings goals.
Okay. And so ultimately, you're an advisor that strategizes. The way I look at you is like if it's the NFL, you're an NFL team owner. You have a coach, you have a team, but you're a consultant that comes in and helps create a strategy against a specific team.
Right.
And you're operating within the rules of the game. You know, there's an NFL game and there are rules, but if you can get creative and do something that gives you an advantage, it's within the rules.
Exactly. That's really what it's all about. A lot of tax pros don't look for those opportunities in the tax code.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that we talked a little bit about this before we started, but we'll get into that some more if we can. Our tax code, it's filled with opportunities. And most tax pros don't go in to find those opportunities. Or there's green lights where you can go without paying tax. So there's red lights where you have to stop and pay tax.
Mm-hmm.
And there are green lights where you can go without paying tax. 95% of our tax code is built with green lights. Opportunities to reduce your tax as an encouragement and incentive to invest in improvements, business expansion, creating more jobs, creating more opportunity in the country.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's important to understand that foundationally, a lot of those things were put in place to inspire action that will be good for the country. And so when you get a tax break, for example, for investing into something or doing something, it's because there's a net positive to the economy, in theory, right?
Exactly.
Okay. So before we get into some of that stuff, and one of our goals here is to really talk about the Trump tax cuts. My understanding is they're not going to be renewed, most likely, if Kamala wins, and probably going to be renewed if Trump wins. Does that sound accurate?
To a point, yeah. So Kamala has stated that she is in favor of renewing most of the Trump tax cuts.
Okay.
For people making under $400,000.
Okay.
Well, that's really where the bulk of the cuts hit anyway, or kick in anyway. So she's not really providing any benefit from keeping that in place. Trump not only wants to keep the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in place, he wants to enhance it. Right now there's a $10,000 cap on deductible state, local, and real estate taxes if you itemize deductions. He wants to take that cap off, which would help out people that are in high income tax states,
Mm-hmm.
high property tax states, because right now, unless you have an opportunity to take the advantage of that through a business, that cap is probably turning a potential deduction from, say, $90,000 to $10,000. And these are people that are losing out on deductible opportunities to save taxes.
Okay. Well, we'll definitely come back to some specifics because that's kind of the goal here. For whatever reason, anytime you say the word Trump, there's certain people that are not going to hear anything after that. And the way I look at it, there's probably great positive benefits from the Trump tax cuts, and there's probably some cons that I might not agree with, for example. But the goal is to try to get the information out there so people can better understand.
Right.
From my point of view, I thought it was a net positive to the general public. And of course, there's spin and there's media and there's narratives and all that. So the goal with anything is to try to cut through that and get the information, the facts best we can. But before we jump into that, where are you from originally?
Well, I was born in Chicago, actually, but my parents moved out to San Diego when I was about 8 years old. So I grew up in beautiful San Diego.
Nice.
Loved it. Lived there probably for a good part of my life. Then Laura and I moved to Phoenix for a short while and then hopped over to this side of the country in 2009.
What brought you all the way out east? Just to change pace?
Economic, really.
Okay.
to be honest. We had some challenges with the housing market there.
Mm-hmm.
Got tired of the high taxes in California and the daily commute. So she had a friend from high school here in the Raleigh area, and we came out. Her friend swore it never rained in Raleigh. That particular weekend we came to visit, we got a deluge of storms.
Okay.
But it was fun, and I liked the trees. I liked the green, and we had a lot of good opportunity here.
Well, I will say this, because I was born in California. I don't know if you knew that, and I went to high school right outside of LA. And the one thing I will say is Southern California weather is about as good as it gets. I didn't really understand what humidity was until I moved, here to North Carolina at the age of 18 with the military. But I love the weather there, but I would never move back to California. San Diego is one of the most beautiful places on the planet in my mind, and California in general. But it's the taxes, the insanity, all the, gonna get rid of gas vehicles, but they've got rolling blackouts with electricity. It's like,
Right.
What are you doing? But anyway, that's another topic. So that being said, obviously a certified agent and all that kind of stuff. You end up out in Raleigh, North Carolina, which for the record, it does rain here. It seems like it rains here a lot more than it used to. Julie and some of the people hear me bellyache about it because growing up on the West Coast, I like sunshine. Mm-hmm. I don't even care if it's 8 degrees or 115. Give me sunshine. I don't want rain and overcast. But I feel like we've had a lot more rain and overcast over the last 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, it does seem that way.
Okay. I could be wrong, but I saw something not too long ago that we had more rain than Seattle a few years back or something like that.
Yeah, we did. My sister lives just outside of Seattle, and I do a comparison sometimes. I've got that weather bug app, and I'll keep an eye on our weather. It's crazy the way the weather seems to have shifted a little bit.
Yeah, that's another conversation as well. But that being said, let me ask you just some general stuff to kind of get us thinking about this. What do you think of when someone says the rich don't pay their fair share? What comes to mind when you think about that?
I'd like to know what statistics they're looking at. The IRS publishes what they call statistics of income, and it breaks down who earns how much they pay in tax, and it stratifies it by groups. Mm-hmm. So if you take a look at that, and what is fair share, of course, as well.
Well, yeah.
When you take a look at that, the top 1% of taxpayers in the U.S. pay 24% of the total tax revenue that goes into the federal coffers.
So the top 1% is paying 24%.
Right.
So they're carrying the massive. They're carrying 24 times what the average person is statistically.
Right.
Okay.
And if we break it down a little bit further, the top 50% are carrying 97% of the total tax revenues into the federal government. So what does that leave left over with the last 3% or so?
So the top 50% of the public are paying 97% of the taxes. Okay. That doesn't sound like a fair share to me. It sounds like they're paying more than their fair share.
It does. And, with success and opportunity, I think there becomes more responsibility to contribute to the common good. But, we've got to be realistic when you try to twist the narrative. And you can make statistics mean anything you want depending on the inputs you put into it. But when you go to the source of where the tax revenue comes in from, into the IRS, and they provide that analysis every year for the prior year's tax returns, you can take a look at where that revenue into the federal government's actually coming from.
That's a big number. I mean, 97% comes from the top 50, which means the bottom 50% are only paying 3%.
Right.
And again, I when I think about stuff like that, I think that, a lot of people will say it's greedy to want to keep a lot of the money that you earn. It's not greedy to want to keep a lot of what you earn. It's greedy for you to expect somebody else to pay for your college or your benefits or fill in the blank. Um, so, what are your thoughts on that?
No, I completely agree with that. And what triggered in my mind as I was making some notes for our conversation today was I think about the people that are in that top 1% that are carrying 24% of the tax burden, but they're also the ones that are taking a lot of charitable contributions to like Samaritan's Purse and American Red Cross and United Way and all that. And I think about what happened in the mountains here in North Carolina, and I think without that kind of support, the relief efforts would have been even more ineffective.
Horrific, yeah.
Because our government inefficiency is a problem, and I don't know what happened up there. I wasn't up there, but some of the reports you see where the charitable relief organizations are doing a killer job, and we had some of the support from the government, but then again, when Milton hit Florida, before it even made landfall, Franklin Graham had two of his big relief semis down there ready to roll into Florida. I'm not sure how much of the federal assets were prepped, but charitable donations going into those organizations is what helps people that are in need.
Right. And I would much rather give to an organization that's efficient and motivated than, again, we just see government incompetence over and over and over. And when you think about all these things like the Department of Education that has billions of dollars, and you look at our educations compared to, education systems all over the world, and we're coming in low, and it's like we throw so much money at the government just to have them spend more than they take in. And for countless amounts of garbage. And so, people would say that, you're greedy because you don't want to help out, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, that's not the case at all. It's, I'm going to do better things with my money than the government, whether it's funding these NGOs that are up to all these politically motivated things. We always have trillions of dollars for wars. You mentioned the North Carolina thing we're coming off of, the floods and all the people that died up there. And I mean, FEMA, they were talking about they're going to be out of money because they've been spending all this money on illegal immigrants and housing and all these different things. And that's just one more example of government incompetence. So, yeah, I'm tired of giving money to the government so they can piss it away and spend it on wars and, pharmaceutical industry greasing them up with billions and billions of dollars of things that, whether you liked them or not, I mean, it was tax dollars that went right into the big corporations. But so that being said, so I guess those are two narratives that you hear out there is, it's greedy to keep what you earn, which I think is the exact opposite. I think that's a government narrative so they can try to get permission to take more from the public. And then the rich don't pay their fair share, which, I mean, obviously the 1% holding down 24% of the revenue. And I just think it's amazing hearing these numbers. 50% pay 97%.
Yeah, it's an incredible tilt. And we look at our tax system. Most people don't understand how that really works, but that's how that comes about because we've got what's called a progressive tax system. So typically, if in most cases, if you qualify for the standard deduction, well, that's your first set of tax-free income. You pay $0 tax on your standard deduction. If you itemize, you pay $0 tax on your itemized. But from there, we've got a 10%, 12%, 22%, and these are all brackets. So we don't, if you're in a 24% bracket, you're not paying 24% on all of your income. You're just paying 24% on that particular segment of income. You've already paid 10% on the first tranche, 12% on the next, 15%, 22%. So what happens, of course, is when you get into the higher levels of income, the higher earners, the business owners, the investors, they're in that 37% bracket. So that tranche starts around $600,000 and goes up no matter how much they make. Now, that's on ordinary income. The other thing that comes into play is how do these people actually earn their income? Because there are different types of tax for different types of income. A lot of the so-called billionaires, if you want, the Warren Buffetts, the Elon Musk, the Jeff Bezos, they have capital gains. They do a lot of stock investing. They get qualified dividends off their stock investments. Those are taxed at a preferential rate of 20%. So that's where we have to look at what the effective tax rate is. And the effective tax rates are what drive how much of somebody's income in those higher levels is going into the federal coffers and how much of somebody's income in the 10% bracket is going into the federal coffers.
Well, it's obviously, I don't envy your job because you probably have to keep up with countless things and policies and shifts. And of course, anytime there's an election or big tax policy, I'm sure you're in the weeds trying to figure all that stuff out.
I love Congress when they get together and they pass a tax bill in December, and we have to prep for it for January, and they make some of it retroactive. That happens a lot.
It sounds like a nightmare. Let me ask you this: where do you believe inflation comes from?
A lot of it comes from government overspending, printing money to make up for the deficit. We've got significant inflation in the last 4 years. We'll cover that without getting too politically entrenched.
Right.
But that really hurts every family out there. From the lower wage earner to somebody with a business and that kind of thing. I've got several clients that have had to find different sources for their products because they can't afford the sources they've always used, and or try to pass on some of those costs to their customers, which then just drives even more inflation downstream.
To me, I've had conversations with people. Of course, they don't come on video to actually have a conversation because they would have to, actually defend their position. But I've spoken with some people that'll say big business is causing all the inflation. And from my point of view, it's just that's another government narrative that's put out by our largely propaganda MSM media, mainstream medias. From my point of view, largely government controlled. And when they put that type of information out there, to me, they're just giving themselves cover to keep printing more cash and create inflation, which is taxing us all without taxing us. So they'll tell us we're not going to raise your taxes, but then they'll print off more cash, which devalues your money, which is essentially the same thing as a tax.
Right. When your dollar buys less, you've got a phantom tax.
Right.
In reality. And that's a problem.
And so when you have these politicians that are talking about $25,000 for new this and money for this and reparations and paying off student loans, and they've got money for everything, including funding every side of every war on the planet apparently now, that money comes from somewhere. They have to print it off. It's not, and I'm no fan of BlackRock or Vanguard, but it's not them necessarily. Can big business influence some inflation? Sure, supply chain issues, there are things like that. But the number one cause of inflation, from my point of view, is printing cash.
Right.
And anybody listening to this, if you hear someone say that Vanguard or whoever is creating the inflation, well, what about in the 60s when we went off the gold standard and we started printing cash and you could see the volume of cash available on the planet, and then you see inflation right along with it. If we can just print out cash, if we can just print off cash with no negative consequences, why are we paying taxes at all?
That's a good point.
So I don't know if people are thinking about, I don't know if critical thinking is still a thing anymore. It's people are fed these narratives by the media, and it's like they don't question anything, and it's baffling to me.
Yeah. Well, you're a business owner. You understand how economics and business finance work, and And you look at that, if the government imposed the same rules on themselves that a business owner has with managing budget and not going overly into debt, uh, it would be insane. What we've got is we've got tremendous deficit spending every year. In fact, the end of fiscal year 2024 for the federal government was the first time that the interest on our federal debt surpassed $1 trillion. So
Just in interest.
just in interest, servicing 35 trillion of debt. Now I looked this up just because I'm kind of a little bit of a nerd that way, but that's $227,000 per taxpayer that covers our federal debt. About $100,000 per
Is that per year?
per citizen. That would be to pay off
Or
the
just in
entire
general,
debt.
if we
In
just took it
general.
all from us right away.
Right.
So we're basically all $250,000 in debt
We're all $250,000 in debt
from
you to
overspending of
federal
the federal
spending.
government.
Yeah, 56% of the federal budget goes to entitlements, including Social Security and Medicare. But a good portion of that is things like the earned income credit. And the IRS already knows, for example, the earned income credit, great program. It's a tax credit, a refundable tax credit to help people in lower incomes, supposedly lift them out of poverty. But what that means is they're getting more in refund than they've paid into the system. But the IRS has already shown that about 32% of that is improper or fraudulent. So we're spending $56 billion of money, government money, on the earned income credit, but at least a third of it is something that shouldn't be going out to people anyway.
And it's essentially taking from people that earn and giving it to people that don't earn.
Right.
It's one form of that.
Right.
And I wonder, is it really lifting those people out of poverty?
That's a great question. When I dealt with retail taxes, of course, we got a lot of people in that qualified for an income credit. And I will say this is probably the exception to the rule rather than the rule, but you have unmarried people coming in that have kids. And they've already factored in who made enough money to maximize their earned income credit, who's going to claim the kids that year. And then they go out and they buy the big screen TV or the new iPhone or whatever. It's meant to help them support the family, not necessarily to buy those toys. We all love toys, but if you've got an opportunity to receive more cash through your taxes, go out and invest it. Go out and do something with it. Support your family.
Right. And that's the thing. I think education, and in my opinion, so many things are not taught to us because I have to conclude they don't want us to know. Why aren't we taught extensively about credit? Why aren't we taught about debt to income ratio? Why aren't we talking about how wealth is created in this country? Why aren't these things being taught? And I have to conclude they don't want us to know those things. And it's a fascinating number. I was talking with someone the other day, and I asked him, I said, how many people in the country are millionaires? And they were like, I think they said like 1,500 or something like that. And last time I looked it up, it was like 22 million people are millionaires. You got a country that's got roughly, let's say legally here, roughly 340 million people. But you're talking 6 or 7% of the country is millionaires. Like there's so much opportunity here. There's a path to get there, but it takes discipline. It takes being smart with your money. And I just don't know that getting more back than you put in is going to actually help people get there. We got to educate people. And I just think we have a system that doesn't want to educate people. They want to keep you there. Yeah. And they're happy when they go out and piss away all their money that they just got back from somebody else who earned it. And they buy that big screen TV because you're propping up these corporations that sell those things. So, from my point of view, over the last probably 4 to 8 years, they just want consumer slaves is basically what it is. And I'm getting way off topic here, but
if I could interject one more
Yeah.
thing on that, it's like it's a cliche, but it's very true. You can give a man a fish and feed him for a day, or you can teach him to fish and feed him for a lifetime.
Right.
And that opportunity is out there for everybody. That's what I did when I got hooked on taxes. I was looking for a way to pay down my student loan, got hooked on it. I turned my side hustle into a very successful business.
Right.
So if you've got an interest, work your full-time job, start a side hustle. The tax code is written for investors and business owners.
Right.
Anyway, so if you want some of those tax breaks that the rich are getting, start a business
Mm-hmm.
and start taking advantage of that and build that business and create your own future, your own
Right.
financial future.
So let me ask you this. I do want to put some positive things in here. So let's say you're out there, you're working, let's say you're making 60 grand a year right now, or 50 grand a year, something like that. You're probably barely getting by right now if you're making that. What would you recommend? We talked about a side hustle. What is something that you would recommend? Let's say you start a car detailing company on the side.
Mm-hmm.
So anything you purchase, now your cell phone is a business phone because you're using it for business, right? You can write off at least a percentage of it, right?
And actually, there was a change to that several years ago. If your cell phone is your primary contact number, cell phones used to be considered listed property, which means you had to allocate between business and personal use.
Mm-hmm.
The IRS changed that several years ago. So if that is your business line, that's a 100% write-off against your business income.
Okay.
You're going out, you're getting a pressure washer
Mm-hmm.
because you're detailing. You're getting all the supplies.
Right.
Eventually, you're going to get to the point where you've got a nice trailer maybe or a rig,
Mm-hmm.
and you're hauling that equipment around, including a big tank for your pressure washer.
Right.
So yeah, those are all opportunities. But the thing that I would recommend somebody looking to start a side hustle and get going, don't do what the government does. Don't rely on credit. Because if you start borrowing just to expand your business,
Mm-hmm.
then you're not going to ever get ahead. So when you're starting out, just get things as you can. If you need to float on a credit card, great, but make sure you can pay that down.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at the federal government, would you buy a business that had an expense amount that was 120% of gross revenues?
No.
Already upside down. That's what
insane.
our federal government does.
Right. Every year.
The entire federal budget is 120% of our gross domestic product. We're upside down coming out of the gate. So don't do that with a business. I've had clients come to us that are almost in that situation. They've so highly leveraged their business with debt. And then they wonder, well, why do I owe taxes? I didn't make any money. No, you didn't make any cash.
Right.
There's a difference between profit and cash. So all your cash went out the door to service that debt. And you can't borrow your way out of debt.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's an interesting thing. You can get buried with it, and I'll give you the other side of this. So obviously owning a security company, when we do a free alarm system, it's not free to me. It's not free to iWatch. We're fronting all the equipment. We're installation, trucks, and all that stuff. And so we do have debt. We have borrowed. And part of why I've been able to keep all of our accounts and grow the net worth of the company and the reoccurring revenue is by borrowing. And so the whole student loan conversation with people that are having their loans forgiven, even though the Supreme Court said you couldn't do that, but I guess we follow the laws when it's convenient for some people. But like these people that have these student loans and they're talking about this extreme amount of money that's going towards interest and it's never getting paid down and they're paying interest only. Well, I'm in that same exact situation as a business owner, but I did good things with the debt. And so there's smart debt, to where I have debt. I don't have hardly any personally other than real estate, but for the company, I've got debt. But there's smart debt, and you can use debt to do real estate, and over time it appreciates while they're paying down the debt. Provided you have good tenants and things like that. So there are productive ways to use debt, but to your point, you're paying interest, and debt can kill you, and you've probably seen it kill a lot of companies and kill a lot of people in general. And it's the federal government's headed towards death, bankruptcy on its current trajectory. It has to change.
It is, and that's very true, right? Right now, people complain about taxes, no matter what tax bracket you're in.
Sure.
But we're in an era of historically low tax rates. Our top tax rate right now is 37%. And a lot of people don't know this. Our income tax came into being in 1913. So it's, in terms of our country's history, it's relatively new. Prior to that, the country relied on tariffs, with the exception of right after the Civil War, there was an income tax for a short while, got kicked out because it was not compliant with, I think it was Article 1's Title IX of the Constitution about apportionment of taxes. I'd have to look that up for exact reference. But anyway, when the tax code first started, we had a top rate of 7% and about 11 brackets. Within 5 years, we had a top rate of 77% and 56 brackets.
Government out of control.
Government out of
Greedy.
control. Then we had to pay for World War II from 44 to 45. Our top rate was 94%. And then during most of the 1950s and into the 60s, the top rate was 91%. So people that are complaining about their tax rates now really have no perspective in what our parents and grandparents went through. Now, not all of them were in that top tier rate, but those brackets were insane. 56 tax brackets. Could you imagine? We have 7 right now. Could you imagine trying to do that tax return? But here's the problem. We've got historically low taxes. Obviously, the tax revenue isn't paying the federal spending every year, and we're accumulating more debt. Eventually, that debt's going to come due. And here's a scary thing. A big chunk of that debt is owned by pension funds and IRAs and other private investments. So what are you going to do when your pension all of a sudden is worth trash because that debt got defaulted, or your IRA? That's a scary future. We just keep kicking that debt can down the road to our kids and our grandkids.
Right. And it's a simple solution. We have to spend less than we take in. We have to trim the federal government. Elon Musk, like him or not, he's talking about trimming $2 trillion off the budget, and we spend all this money on nonsense all over the country. Everything's overinflated with government. The Pentagon can't, it's amazing. If I handled my company like the Pentagon handles their books, I'd be in jail right now. It's just unbelievable when you think about it. And the standards that we have as citizens and business owners that the government enforces on us, they don't even play by their own set of rules. And it's just amazing to me that some people want more government and more regulation and things like that. How about more accountability for the government?
That would be a great thing. And, try not to step too much into the political realm here, but I've always felt we needed more businessmen and fewer attorneys in the federal government.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you're seeing that now. I think that, and I was talking with Mustafa here before we started the podcast, and I said, I don't even really think it's Republicans versus Democrats. I said, I really think it's now you see it more clearly. It's the machine versus the people. And in my opinion, you have, you got the Dick Cheneys of the world that are throwing their weight behind Kamala. Not to get into political stuff, but I guess we are. But, it's like, so he's a Republican, but he's throwing his weight behind Kamala because she's part of the machine. Dick Cheney, the guy that got us into the Iraq war on a lie, who was the former CEO of Halliburton, made all that money for Halliburton. It's clearly they manipulated that situation for financial profits for many corporations. And so then you got the other guys that are we want healthy people. We want balanced budgets. And, the machine is going to fight because the machine wants all that money to keep flowing.
Right.
And that's how I look at it. And it doesn't care if there's an endless war in Ukraine where, billions of dollars will go, like $2 trillion went over in Afghanistan. They want to keep that cash flowing into those corporations. So coming back here, I did see something here recently, Bill, where now this was according to 2022, and we'll probably throw it up on the screen here, but 1.1% of the people that were audited, I think this was 2022, were millionaires, which means 98.9% of the people that were audited were not millionaires. And so what are your thoughts on that?
There's a couple of things to look at. The IRS conducts audits a number of different ways. So we've got in-person audits. We've got what's called correspondence audits, which is getting a letter in the mail saying we don't agree with what you reported on your return. But historically, audit rates have been low. They've been, for individuals, typically under about 5%, and for businesses, even lower than that. So that's another strategy. If somebody wants to start a side hustle, they're perhaps protecting some of their finances from audit if they've run it right. But overall, again, historical rates have been low, but IRS is ramping up. There's no doubt about that. There's a significant undercollection amount, and they haven't had the staff in many years to fulfill those audits. So what we're faced with is, I'm not sure if this is answering all of your question, we've got more staff coming on board with the IRS, hopefully more to tackle some of these audits or examinations, if you want to use an alternate term. Have to be careful. In Texas, you can't say you're doing an audit when you represent somebody for a tax situation. But what we've got is the Irish commissioner saying that they're not going to increase audit rates on lower income people above historic levels. Well, historic levels haven't been hit in a long time. So what does that mean? Yes, audits are going to pick up across the board, including for lower income people. Once they hit that historical level, will they stop? Probably not. But also, typically, small businesses like you and I, if we were faced with an audit, we would be audited by the Small Business and Self-Employed Division of the IRS. They've just spun off a new group specifically targeting pass-through entities, which is partnerships and S corporations. So now they've split that off into a different avenue, which hopefully the auditors will have better training and understanding of how the tax code works. Right now, we're faced with a lot of new staff at the IRS that doesn't know that. And unfortunately, that's slowed down what we can do with resolving problems for our clients. But with a new group that's devoted to those pass-through entities, we're probably going to see business audits climb substantially.
It's I saw something, and it's a double-edged sword, right? Like I want people to pay. I want people to pay. I understand why there's audits, which is also why I also understand why we should audit an election. That's another topic. So I think there's an old military saying that I learned a long time ago: inspect what you expect. So I'm okay with there being audits, because there certainly are people out there that are going to try to get over, maybe make up stuff, use fake receipts, things like that. But that being said, I don't like the narrative when they say we're going to go after businesses, we're going to go after billionaires and all that, and then all of a sudden they're tracking your $600 Venmo transactions. That's not a billionaire doing that. That's everyday people. That's a waitress. That's a landscaper. That's, when the IRS brought on, 87,000 new agents or something like that a while ago. I'll try to fact check myself after this, but they were bragging about how they brought in $1 billion in new audits and new revenue, but they just spent like $60 billion to do this. So when you look at the math, it's you spend 60 to bring in another one. That's a net loss.
Right. Well, and that's government math. But to kind of back up some of the 87,000 agents, Congress allocated a budget for them to bring out 87,000 full-time equivalents. So not all of them will be agents, but there's also appropriations that have to come into that. So not the full budget has not been appropriated yet. But yes, you're right. We're going to be seeing an uptick in everything across the board with the IRS. And that's the only way for them to bring in more money into the government coffers.
Well, to keep spending like they are.
Yeah. But despite what everybody feels, our tax system, our income tax system, is a voluntary system. You volunteer to report your income on this 2-page form that you're signing under penalty of perjury, and this is your income and this is your tax. And that's where the IRS comes in with the audit routine of making sure that what you reported is actually what you're entitled to.
So coming into, let's talk about Trump tax cuts specifically. I was always under the impression this was a positive for the public in general. And, these things are complicated. There's a lot of nuance. and how it impacts the country in general. I have a general point of view, and I'd like to dive into this a little bit, because as a business owner, I have a lot of control over my personal income. I have a tremendous amount of control over that, provided my company's making money, obviously.
Right.
But what would you say are some of the, from your point of view, what would you say are some of the biggest pros to the Trump tax cuts?
So most of the pros are that it provided a tax reduction for everybody across the board.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care what strata of income you're in, depending on which resource you look at. Anywhere from 65 to 80% of U.S. taxpayers benefited from the Trump tax cuts. So
because it hit every single income bracket.
It hits every single level. Now, of course, we're looking at this rhetoric out there that, well, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, Trump's tax cuts, whatever you want to call it, only benefited the ultra wealthy. Well, again, we have to look back at partly how they earn their income, but really, when we look at all the levels of taxpayers that saw their tax situation change from 2017 to 2018 when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act came into play, most taxpayers saw their average tax rate. We have to look at average tax rate when we're trying to compare apples to apples. So we can't look at, well, what tax bracket were you in? Because your average rate is a blend of all that. How much of your income actually went to taxes? When we look at that, most taxpayers saw their outlay for federal taxes drop by 0.5% to 1% across the board.
Mm.
The upper echelon, the one percenters, if you want to call them that, did see a little bit more of a drop of it, about 1.2%.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, in most cases, everybody saw some level of tax relief.
Okay. So I guess the argument, some would say, well, the richer got richer with the Trump tax cuts, and it sounds like that's probably the case.
They probably got richer, but then they're also paying a higher tax rate.
Right.
So once we get past that $600,000 or so in taxable income, they saw their tax rate on that part of their income drop from 39.6% to 37%.
So really what the rhetoric is we all benefited from the Trump tax cuts. However, those people up there benefited more.
Benefited slightly more on a percentage basis.
Slightly more on a percentage basis. So, okay. So that's the rhetoric, is where, he only cares about the one percenters and this and that, where everybody benefited from it.
Right. And
so,
then, of course, like you pointed out, that these tax cuts are slated to expire at the end of 25. So what happens then?
Right.
And what do the candidates want? What are they proposing?
And so, I guess jumping into that, because you've looked this over, right?
I have, and
Okay.
I've got some great resources. If any of your listeners are interested, go to taxfoundation.org. They have a calculator where you can actually plug in your own tax return information and find out what your taxes are going to look like if the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expires. So I did pull up a couple of examples because I knew you were interested in this. Let's look at the millionaires. They've got an example on their website. Laura and Seth, they're married with 2 kids. They make $2 million a year. Okay, that's pretty significant. If this tax cut policy expires, they're going to see their tax bill go up $24,000. That's a pretty significant chunk of money. Maybe not that much for somebody who's making $2 million.
Still $24,000.
That's still
a lot of money.
$24,000. But let's look at some of the people that are maybe not so wealthy, not so well off.
Okay.
I apologize for having to refer my notes.
This is great.
Try to memorize everything. So let's look at Amber. She's single. She doesn't have any kids. She makes $75,000 a year. Probably a semi-professional, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
She's going to pay $1,700 more in federal taxes if these cuts expire.
That's almost $150 a month difference.
Yeah, that's real spendable money.
That's a lot of money.
We got
especially when you factor in inflation just took 19 or 20% of your money.
Right. So we're upside down with inflation. Then we're even more upside down when these cuts expire.
Right.
A couple that are married with 3 kids making $200,000, which is probably pretty typical in our economy.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to see their tax bill go up $7,500.
$7,500.
So these tax cuts, like I said, benefited everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, at different levels, depending on what your income is.
Sure.
I sure could use that $7,500 if I'm in their situation.
Yeah.
That's a significant amount of money.
So at the end of the day, it sounds like if the Trump tax cuts expire, it's a negative to everybody except for the federal government.
Right.
They take more direct cash.
They do.
Okay. So there's one winner and everybody else basically
And,
loses.
335 million losers.
Yeah. So that seems like a no-brainer to me, but we'll see how that shakes out. But it's just amazing how they can get the government and the media in general is just amazing how they're able to manipulate people into giving more money to the government, and getting nothing in return or very little in return. It's just fascinating to me. So jumping back into it, Bill, looking at part of what we had talked about was corporate tax rates and how that impacts things. And you've got some specific scenarios that what the two candidates are proposing.
Right. So if we kind of go back to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act a little bit real quick. So what that did with corporate tax rates was it took our tax bracket tiered system, which we had for corporations as well as for individuals, and the top rate there was 39%, collapsed it all down into one specific flat tax rate of 21%. So comparing the two candidate proposals, and I know that we'll probably have this going out after the fact, but let's take a look at that. So Vice President Harris wants to increase that 21% to 28%. That was also Biden's proposal as well. So that's a very real impact on corporations.
Mm-hmm.
President Trump is proposing that we leave actually cut the 21% to 20%, and then for businesses that are making products in the U.S., providing U.S. jobs, cut them further to 15%. Now it's interesting that
incentivizing companies to make their products in the United States
and expand.
Right.
The more you
expand in the United States.
Exactly.
Creates jobs in the United States.
And that's really what our tax code is supposed to do. It's supposed to incentivize investment, job creation, and expansion of the gross domestic product in the economy.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the other things that came into play with that, of course, President Trump is proposing eliminating tax on Social Security, and Vice President Harris, I believe, jumped on that bandwagon as well, if I'm not mistaken. But several years ago, probably about a decade ago, people that had paid into the Social Security system now all of a sudden saw their benefits getting taxed if they earned too much income. Social Security was never meant to be a sole source of income for somebody in retirement. But now if you've got pension income, if you've got a couple of rentals that are providing you with cash, because nobody can live just on Social Security.
Right.
Now you're suddenly getting hit with up to 50 or 85% of your Social Security benefits being taxed. And I've never been a fan of that. I like what Trump is talking about, eliminating that, but we'll see if that actually gets pushed through. You're a business owner, you're familiar with the pass-through advantages of S corporations and partnerships. Vice President Harris wants to expand the net investment income tax. Now, what that was President Obama added some surtaxes and some kind of hidden taxes to help support his Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. One of those was a net investment income tax, which is a Medicare tax on investment income from capital gains, dividends, and interest. So when you reach a certain level of income, you're paying 3.8% additional tax on top of the tax rates for that income, for your portfolio income. She wants to apply that to the pass-through income of S corporations and partnerships and bump it up to 5%. So now your income, there is no benefit really to an S corporation at that point if you're paying Medicare tax on it.
What's basically redistribution in another form.
Another form of wealth redistribution.
Right. So basically taking from one person and giving it to another, which I'm not a fan of. The other thing too, Bill, is when we talk about Kamala wanting to raise the corporate tax rate in Biden to 28%, the thing that I think about and that you can look up corporate tax rates in countries around the world.
Right. We've always had the highest.
And we've got the highest. So when we have the highest, so we're at 21 right now. If they bump it to 28 and you look at a company like I know this, I'm pretty sure this was accurate a while back. Pfizer
Mm-hmm.
had moved their headquarters to, I want to say Ireland, because they had a 13% tax bracket.
Mm-hmm.
And they took lots of jobs with them when they do that. And so what happens is a company like Pfizer, or fill in the blank, it doesn't have to be Pfizer, but any company that can be international like that, if they can change countries and go from 28 to 13%, you're talking about 15% on your bottom line. You're a big company like that, you're talking about a lot of money. And then maybe even you're paying employees less because you're in a foreign country.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Those employees aren't paying into our Social Security and Medicare system.
right? They're not paying into the system. So it's this huge net loss. So while you say you're getting more from the company, you're actually losing companies, and you're squeezing the companies that are left for more.
Mm-hmm.
It's a net hurt on the country. There's going to be less jobs. There's potentially less tax revenue versus something like lowering the tax rate, giving additional incentives for companies to keep the jobs here in the United States, where we have higher standards for workers, where you have plenty of unions, you got benefits, you got all these different things. And a company is going to do what's in the company's best interest in most cases. And you can't blame the company for that. You have to understand that, and you have to create tax policy that inspires good behavior that benefits our country. And that's what's baffling to me. I don't understand how people can't understand that 1 + 1 = 2. When you do this, businesses are going to do this.
Right. Well, anybody that's faced with heavier and heavier tax burdens is going to find a way to mitigate that.
Right.
There was a big push for expats around the same time frame when tax rates were going up. But really, the government's got to understand that you don't bite the hand that feeds you. I know that's another cliche,
Mm-hmm.
but you're exactly right. Corporations moved a lot of their operations offshore,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things that love them or hate them, Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act offered an opportunity for those companies to come back at a preferred repatriation of,
Mm-hmm.
of their revenues, basically giving them a tax incentive to bring those jobs back to the U.S.
Right. So there's incentives to keep them here, and then he also has the stick of tariffs and all that to beat you if you don't do it. So it's incentivizing and decentivizing
Mm-hmm.
at the same time. And I think being a business guy, and this is not a pro-Trump podcast, we're just talking about data. We're talking about numbers. I would love to see Kamala have these type of numbers. But coming back to something I said earlier, as an owner of a company, I have a lot of impact in what I do based on outside things. I just committed to spending a good chunk of money on redoing our website.
Mm-hmm.
Needed to be done. I don't have to do that. And if I want to throw the company into a very conservative, cautious, non-expanding type mindset, I can do that in a heartbeat. I can do it in a minute. And I can start getting rid of expenses. I can stop hiring new employees. I can maybe get rid of an employee to free up cash. And if I get squeezed as a business owner too much, those are things that I will do. Even though my nature is I want to grow,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to create a great work environment. During the pandemic, I was buying vitamins and keeping vitamin C and all this kind of stuff in our office. We've got Jocko drinks here, hydration drinks, because they're good, and it's I like that kind of stuff for employees. I want to create a great work environment. But what happens when government starts squeezing, those are the things that start getting impacted. Is as a business owner, I have to protect the company, number one. And the more cash flow that I have to be able to create better work environments and things like that, it's a net benefit for everybody here. Mm-hmm. And that's what's baffling to me. I just don't understand how people don't get that.
Yeah. To build on that, I mentioned earlier that I did some back of the envelope calculations for a couple of clients comparing the two candidate proposals for their tax plan. And a couple of them would have significant tax increases, enough to pay another person a full-time salary or expand more. I've got one client that's looking at expanding because his sales team has outgrown the space there and he's going to buy a new commercial property.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if his taxes go up, that's like you said, a disincentive to doing that.
Right.
And then he may have to scale back because more of his cash has to go to taxes than it would to buy that commercial property, provide more jobs, and expand his business.
Mm-hmm. So that's a great example. So he's not buying a building. Commercial realtors are not making money.
Mm-hmm.
The market slows down, and
The
people
the county's making less tax.
county makes less money. You know, there's maybe not a job that's not created now. It's just it's common sense to understand that there's a cause and effect of these policies. And that was my goal here today, is just talk about some of the cause and effect type stuff. And you've clearly demonstrated, based on what we've talked about, the Trump tax cuts are good for everybody. You know, now you can maybe get mad that they're better for somebody than you in the bracket, but who cares? I don't give a personally, I don't give a shit what some billionaire's making. I know that guy's paying, you know, when we demonize, let's say Amazon, who I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of. They've got a great product, and they've done a great job in many ways. But they get attacked for not paying corporate taxes, right? But factored into that is like the 1 year that I saw this, they spent they went into debt, $150 billion or something. So they made $20 billion, but they went in debt $150 billion. I'm using random numbers, right. But that expansion created jobs. They're paying property taxes on all those vehicles. Can you imagine how much gas they buy?
That's crazy.
And all the taxes and the gas. So companies, when they're large, even a small company like us, I'll just share a number right now. Our accounting for my company, we're a small company. We're going to do less than $2 million this year. For a small company like us, I'm spending about $10,000 a year on QuickBooks, Right Networks, my CPA, my bookkeeper, my admin, not including her labor, to track all this stuff. I pay probably, we're probably running $1 million a year in credit cards. I pay the credit card fees on taxes that are collected. Mm-hmm. So Wake County, we charge 7.25% tax. I'm absorbing the credit card fees to collect tax for them.
Right.
So there's all these expenses that businesses have that the average person just has no idea about.
They have no idea what goes into running a business until they're actually there.
Right. $10,000 a year. That has nothing to do with my mission. That's not me, putting a piece of bread in my mouth. It's $10,000 a year to deal with the administration and taxes and that sort of thing. But thank goodness for people like you that help us, because we have to be smart about that. We have to be smart about taxes. So bottom line is, I think Trump tax cuts are good. Mm-hmm. The machine wants more money, like it always does.
Well, the machine's going to need more money. I'm just not sure what the solution is to that. We can't keep kicking that debt can down the road.
Right. Or they can cut, like I would have to do as a business owner.
Right.
We've got so many, the federal government has the most employees in the history of the world. Mm-hmm. Our federal government employs the most people. We've got government workers in the millions. And I have to tell you that I don't know that I get less value for my money anywhere like the federal government.
Yeah, I think as a tax pro and a lot of my peers in the tax pro community, we really face this because we've got very short staffing on the IRS phones. Have you ever tried to call their 800 number?
I've been on hours. Yeah,
we've got a special phone line. We still sit on hold for hours, and then we get somebody who doesn't know the tax code because they're poorly trained, and then most people aren't aware of this, but when there's a FEMA disaster like what happened with Helene up in the mountains or what happened with Milton, the phone team at the IRS is conscripted to answer FEMA phones.
Wow.
So now all of a sudden, if we've got a problem with a tax situation for a client, we can't get through on the phone because there's nobody answering the phone there. So yeah, the efficiency there and the value for what's going into the federal government coffers is pretty small.
Well, plenty of room for improvement. We're probably not going to solve it all today, but Bill, thank you for taking the time to come in and point out some of these details. I really appreciate it.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thanks for joining us on another Five Things podcast. We'll see you next time.